Hey guys, today I'm going to be talking about trauma. Pre-trauma, post-trauma, and main trauma. So first I'm going to explain to you what trauma is, and then I'm going to give you some definitions and some scientific, what nows about it. Trauma is something that happened to you that could be blunt, psych, psychological. That did not come out right. Psychological could be uh, geriatric trauma, could be pediatric trauma, could be vicarious trauma. It could be a lot of different things. So now I'm going to go through all the types of trauma, and I am going to name them. So, here they are. Sorry, I had to check my phone. First thing I'm going to go through is blunt trauma. Blunt force trauma. In medical terminology, blunt trauma, blunt injury, or non-penetrating trauma, or blunt force trauma refers to a type of physical trauma caused to a body part, either impact, injury, or physical attack that later usually being referred to as blunt force trauma. The term itself is used to refer to the precursory trauma, from which there is further development of more specific types of trauma such as concussions, abrasions, lacerations, and/or bone fracturing. Blunt trauma is contrasted with penetrating trauma, in which an object such as a bullet enters the body. Blunt trauma is something like someone gave you a black eye. That is blunt trauma. That is what it is. So you guys get blunt trauma. It happens. It hurts. Whatever. It just happens. Second thing we're gonna go to is the gross one, penetrating trauma. Penetrating trauma is an injury that occurs when an object pierces the skin and enters a tissue of the body, creating an open wound. In blunt or non-penetrating trauma, there may be an impact, but the skin is not necessarily broken. The penetrating object may remain in the tissues, come back out through the way it's called a perforating injury. While penetrating trauma implies that the object does not pass through, perforating trauma is associated with entrance wound, and often larger exit wound. Penetrating trauma can be caused by a foreign object or fragments or a broken bone, usually occurring in violent crime or armed combat. Penetrating injuries are usually caused by gunshots and stabbing. Penetrating trauma can be serious because it can damage internal organs and presence of risk and shock. The severity of injuries varies widely depending on the body's parts involved. The characteristics of penetrating object and the amount of energy transmitted to the tissues assessment may involve x-rays or CT scans, and treatment may involve surgery, for example, to repair damaged structures or remove foreign objects. So, like, if someone shot you and that bullet did not come out, then you'd have to get surgery to take it out of you. You. So that's what that is. Penetrating trauma is the scary trauma that you guys have. Trying to get rid of this fly. Go away. Working on a video. So now we have, different. Another trauma. We've already been over blunt trauma, penetrating trauma. Blunt trauma and penetrating trauma. Now we have psychological trauma. I can't say the word psychological sometimes. So now I'm going to read this to you. It might take a bit. Psychological trauma is a type of damage due to the psyche that occurs as a result of a traumatic event. When trauma leads to post-traumatic stress disorder, damage may involve physical changes inside the brain and to brain chemistry, which changes the person's response to future stress. A traumatic event involves a single experience or an enduring or repeat of events or events that completely overwhelm the individual's ability to cope or integrate with the ideas and emotions involved with that experience. The sense of being overwhelmed can be delayed by weeks, years, even decades, as the person struggles to cope with the immediate circumstances. Psychological trauma can lead to serious long-term negative consequences that are often overlooked even by mental health professionals. If clinicians fail to look through trauma lens and conceptualize client problems as related possibly to current or past trauma, they may fail to see the trauma victims, young and old, organize much of their lives around repetitive patterns of reliving and warding off traumatic memories, reminders, and effects. That was worded so awkwardly, I didn't even understand that. Psychological trauma is a trauma, in case you did not get that at all. Psychological trauma is a type of trauma that is emotional, like say your dad died or something. Like you see someone's dad died and they're really, really sad and like, you know what I mean. So here is another type of trauma. Vicarious trauma. Transformation in the self of a trauma worker or helper that results from empathic engagement with traumatized clients. Vicarious traumatization is a transformation in the self of a trauma worker or helper that results from empathic engagement with the traumatized clients from their reports of traumatic experiences. Its hallmark is distributed spirituality or meaning and hope. McCann and Perlman coined with this term, especially to reference the experience of psychotherapists working with trauma survivor clients. Others, including I don't know who that is, have expanded its application to Price, 2007. I don't know what that means. Justice system professionals Levi and Graceberg, healthcare providers, humanitarian workers, journalists, and first responders. This has a ton of names in it. I can't read a lot of these names. It's Shahan Madrid and Shishayir. I don't know. I'm not even going to get into that. So now you know what vicarious, psychological, penetrating, and blunt trauma are. So now, geriatric trauma. Geriatric trauma is trauma in the elderly. Like your grandma, or your grandpa, or your great-grandma, or your great-grandpa, or your great-great-great-grandma, or your great-great-great-grandpa, or whoever. Geriatric trauma. Geriatric trauma refers to a trauma injury that occurs to an elderly person. The three prevailing causes of traumatic death in the elderly are falls, which occur for 40% of traumatic death in this age group. Traffic collisions and burns. So, now you know what geriatric trauma is. Old people trauma. Pediatric trauma. Trauma in children or babies. I'm so sorry. Pediatric trauma refers to a traumatic injury that happens to infant, child, or adolescent. So say you fall and you scrape your knee and you break your pinky like I did, so my hand is all screwed up. That's what that trauma is. You, as a child, an adolescent, get hurt. That's pediatric trauma. So now, that is all of the traumas. So now what I want to talk to you about is the definition of trauma. Trauma, a deeply distressing or disturbing experience. Say if you had a really bad dream, that'd be a type of trauma, but not a serious type of trauma. 2. An emotional shock following a stressful event or physical injury may be associated with physical shock and sometimes leads to stress. I talked about that in my last video. There'll be a little annotation right there. It's my last video. And then, maybe, just maybe, it might not be right here. It might be over here. And then I will have the next video link right here. So click on those. So guys, that was my take on trauma. For some of you girls who lost your mom or your dad or your sister or your brother or your aunt or your uncle or whoever. There you go. Bye guys. See you tomorrow.